mouth breather, it is very easy to continue existing, to stay alive in merely the sense of not dying. That's an easy thing for most people to do under most circumstances. The basic instinct of humanity is to survive at whatever cost. We have seen this countless times throughout history. People who are starving will eat things that are not food just to fill up their stomach. They will do whatever they have to do. They will cross miles of terrain on just in their bare feet, just to be able to get back from being lost in the wilderness. So people will do whatever they have to do in order to stay alive. That is the basic condition of being a living person. So it's very easy to not die, but it's a lot harder to have something to actually live for. And that's something that I struggle with in my own life, but I think it's also something that it's not just a common problem among people in our society. It is like a definitional issue of how our world works. The current state of affairs, the way that people live in the modern age is at the very least unnatural and not what we evolved to deal with. Or if you choose not to believe in evolution, then we could say we were created for the proverbial Garden of Eden, or whatever version of that your beliefs entail. But whatever it was that we once had, we are currently not. We are living in a very different reality than the one that we spent almost our entire history for. If you want to think that humanity is 6,000 years old, then, you know, we have recorded history going back about that far, and the modern lifestyle paradigm is completely unprecedented up until less than 200 years ago, barely more than 100. So even if you only go with 6,000 years, that's a long, long time that we were one way and all of a sudden we're a different way. And if you believe that we have existed for millions of years, then that's, thousands of times worse. Or, So my point, we have in our, I am firmly convinced, we have in our psychological makeup as human beings, alongside our need for food and sleep and sex and other basic biological functions, along our fear response when we're presented with threats, along with our drive for food and shelter, our need to leave a legacy behind and contribute to future generations, all of these basic human primal impulses, I believe that we have a need for a sense of purpose along with all of that, and the modern world is really good at denying us that. It is really good at frustrating our need to feel as though we are the captain of our own ship, as it were. So I think that this is why conditions like depression and anxiety are overwhelming in the modern age. Why we have entire generations, not just one, but like 2 or 3 in a row here, of people who never quite fully grew up. They pursue childhood things even into adulthood, and then when they start having kids, they don't even know how to raise the children to become adults because they never fully became adults themselves. So, 2 or 3 generations of that, getting worse every time. So we are in essence being starved as a species. Our environment is not providing one of the nutrients that we need the same way that we need certain vitamins and minerals in our food supply. Otherwise, if we just eat food that doesn't have the nutrients we need, then we will be lacking and we will have all sorts of problems as a result. You don't eat any you're eating lots of food, but you don't eat any vitamin C. so you get scurvy. You don't eat enough calcium, so that you have osteoporosis. I'm not sure if that one's true, but these are extremely obvious examples. A real medical professional could come up with better ones. But so there are mental as well as chemical things that we need, because we are animals that have evolved to have a psychological as well as biological reality to ourselves, where we need certain things to be true in our environment, and we need to perceive things as being true in our own lives, or we react to the perceived loss. Even if it's not quote unquote real, it becomes real to us because of our perception that we need it, and that perception comes from a very deep place within us. So for a long time we have had an existence of nothing but struggle and hardship, and for most of human history we just sort of accepted that as inevitable, and then a process of dominoes tipping over began several thousand years ago or several hundred years ago. It'd be hard to track down the exact details, but if nothing else, the Middle Ages pretty definitely started the trend towards what would end up becoming the reality that we have now, because the Middle Ages was basically when the royal feudal paradigm started to collapse in favor of the rise of a merchant class that had tremendous wealth and influence based on their commercial aspirations. And so there were people who were trading before, but trade empires did not become a thing until somewhere in the 1500s, roughly thereabouts-ish. Like I said, I'm not good at the facts and figures of this. I'm a broad strokes philosophizer, but somewhere in the Middle Ages we started to have this attitude of we're going to make our money, and we're going to become so rich that we can live like kings, and we're going to do it by just pandering to the desires of large numbers of people. This sort of thing could not happen until cities became commonplace, which in turn required certain forms of infrastructure to be perfected. So, as the world population went up and was more and more concentrated in a relative handful of places instead of scattered all across the countryside in little cottages that were a day's ride by camelback from each other, eventually it became practical for large-scale big business, a distant ancestor of the kinds of corporations that we have right now, the medieval merchant guilds and Dutch East India companies and that kind of thing, were really able to take off based on the fact that there was this large customer base available, that this was a fairly new thing, that large numbers of people had disposable income and were not completely living hand to mouth as just subsistence farmers and nothing else. So it became possible for these merchant lords to begin offering people what they want, instead of just those people having to go out and get what they need. If you had, if you were a cabbage farmer, let's say, it used to be you would grow your own cabbages and trade them with a few fellow villagers for other foodstuffs, so that you weren't eating purely an all-cabbage diet, but you would mostly just eat your own cabbages, give some percentages of them to the feudal lord who owned the land that you were a serf toiling upon, and trade a few to others, and that was it. Basically, like half of your diet was probably some variety of cabbage, because that's what you were actually growing. That's what you had in large quantities. So now it became possible for these merchant lords to buy all of your cabbages and sell them all over the world, and meanwhile start bringing things from all over the world and selling them to you at whatever rate you could afford. And people got this advantage and sort of went crazy with it. They'd had incredibly meager lives before, and suddenly their options just kind of exploded, and they were able to do so many more things that were previously inconceivable. And so a very rapid series of processes led from that 1500s through to the 1700s with the Industrial Revolution, and then to the 1900s with the first really major shift away from agriculture as the default life paradigm for almost everybody. And so we're like 3 industrial revolutions in, and the world has been transformed into this thing that our lizard brain just does not recognize. We are incapable of figuring out the new reality that has been dumped upon us. And because we are no longer, I'm not trying to argue for the idea that we need life to be hard again. That is not something that I support. But I do think that something is distorting our perceptions. Our too comfortable lives, our modern conveniences, are unnatural things that we did not evolve to cope with. And so our brains are confused and don't quite know how to process what we're looking at. So we're having all sorts of weird twitches and reactions that we don't fully understand, and lots of things have been spiraling out of control for a long time and building up and piling on top of each other, and things have now gotten to the point where the meaning of life, as it were, has kind of been lost to us. We don't know why we're bothering to go on. A few people do come up with a really good reason for living, and more power to those people. They've got it figured out, but a lot of us are really struggling with it. A lot of us don't quite know why we bother going through the motions of our day-to-day existence, and that leads to a strong sense of malaise and fugue and just general listlessness in life. And I think that it is high time we as a society looked at how we're going to actually turn things around and start changing back towards a more sustainable form of life that isn't entirely founded on these false illusions and these unsustainable paradigms that we've been slowly poisoning ourselves with for several hundred years when we lived for several thousand years without them. So, once again, I'm not trying to go all the way to the other extreme overnight, but I think we need to look at the possibility that the direction things have been going has not been the correct direction, and that we need to start turning the ship around, or pulling the brakes on the train that is currently heading off the cliff. As usual, my brain thinks entirely in metaphors, so it's very difficult for me to state things plainly. But I look around at the way society is reacting to the coronavirus, and I just shake my head at the incredible, misguided concept that we have to achieve ultimate complete safety from even the tiniest hint of a threat. It's a completely ridiculous way to go through life when you consider all the things that our species have had to deal with in the past. There's an old podcast by Crack.com that was talking about how weird it is to live in California, and how people who moved there from other parts of the country couldn't believe how many warning this thing has been theoretically speculated to cause cancer. How many disclaimers and warnings and signs were everywhere, just freaking out over the tiniest little thing, and they speculated that was a very California thing, and they might be right, but I think it's a very modern Western world kind of a thing, that the rest of humanity throughout all of space and time, pretty much everywhere other than in the industrial Western modern world, which is in the process of expanding to conquer the rest of the world. We're trying to turn third world nations into new markets for the global economy, and that's a whole other subject that I'm not going to get into as to how questionable and dangerous that might be. But we had an opportunity when this coronavirus came along to react to it in a very different way, and to see it as a wake-up call that we needed to stop having this incredibly paranoid, weak-willed reaction of please state, please power-structured system, please rich people who control all the power and influence in our society, protect us helpless common people from all of the things that we can't control. That impulse, I am firmly convinced, came down to us from the Middle Ages when those first serfs were given a taste of what it was to have actual money thanks to these merchant lords. And that's not something that we were prepared for, and we've handled it badly. I'm not saying we have to completely go back to the way things were before, but I think we need to revise the direction that things have been heading, because it's pretty clear there have been some negative side effects and unintended consequences to the way things have happened so far. I think that's enough vague doomsaying for one day. This is already my longest video yet, so hopefully it at least made some vague amount of sense.